There are houses that remember. Even after their walls have crumbled and their gardens have turned to weeds, something lingers, an echo, a mood, a presence that refuses to let go. Willow Creek Plantation was one of those places. In the spring of 1852, Calhoun County, Georgia, was a kingdom of cotton. White blooms stretched across the land like low-hanging clouds, and at its heart stood the Bogard estate, 2,000 acres of wealth, sorrow, and silence. The main house rose on a gentle hill, with white columns that gleamed in the southern sun. From a distance, it looked serene, almost regal. But those who worked the land knew better. The Bogard name carried weight, but not kindness. Thomas Bogard was a man of numbers and property, heir to a fortune built on sweat he never shed. Behind his measured voice and sharp eyes was a man who believed control could keep the world in order. Yet there was one thing his money couldn't buy: an heir. He and his wife, Ellalinina, had been married 7 years. 7 years of Sunday smiles, polite dinners, and unspoken grief. 3 pregnancies had ended in heartbreak, each one leaving her paler, quieter, more withdrawn. The house began to feel haunted long before anyone saw anything unnatural. Those who visited Willow Creek said Ellalinina was a woman out of place in her own time, graceful, bookish, with an almost ethereal calm. She moved through the plantation like a ghost before her time, her eyes always drifting toward the east fields. Thomas tried to bring laughter back into their lives, lavish dinners, new horses, even a piano from Savannah, but nothing seemed to reach her. That spring, something changed. One evening, as the humid air clung to the walls and the cicadas sang through the magnolias, Ellalinina entered Thomas's study unannounced, something she had never done before. He looked up from his ledgers, surprised. Her hands trembled around a lace handkerchief. "Thomas," she whispered, "there's something in the east field. Something not right." He laughed, half distracted, half amused. "Probably a vagrant," he said. "I'll have Jackson check the fences in the morning." But she didn't laugh. Her voice dropped lower. "He was watching the house. Watching me." Thomas waved her off, poured another glass of bourbon, and returned to his papers. Outside, the mockingbirds went silent. The next morning, the fields looked the same as they always had. But from that day on, something in Ellalinina's gaze changed, an alertness, a quiet dread, like someone who knows the shadows are not empty. Servants whispered that she lingered by the nursery window long after midnight, that she'd stand on the porch at dawn, staring east, as if waiting for someone to appear. And then one evening she told Sarah, the head housemaid who'd served the family since Thomas was a child, something that made even the old woman's blood run cold. "He looked right at me," Ellalinina said, "as if he already knew my name." By summer, everyone at Willow Creek would know that name. They just wouldn't speak it aloud. Because whatever had begun in those quiet fields, whatever had started watching that house, wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The first time Ellalinina saw him, the morning sun had barely broken through the haze. Mist rolled over the cotton fields like a slow-moving tide, and the air smelled of wet earth and magnolia. She'd gone out for air, something she often did when sleep refused to come. That's when she noticed it. A shape in the distance. Still. Unmoving. Watching. At first, she thought it was one of the workers. But no, he was too tall, too still. Even from across the field, she could tell something was wrong. His posture was unnatural, deliberate, like a statue someone had placed there to look back at her. Then, as if sensing her gaze, the figure turned, slowly, and for one frozen moment she saw his eyes. They weren't just light or dark. They were different. Like the reflection of sunlight on deep water, shifting, alive, impossible. By the time Thomas sent a servant to check, the field was empty. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. Thomas laughed when she told him. He said it was her imagination. Too many novels, too many sleepless nights. But the house servants noticed that he stopped laughing when she mentioned those eyes again. Days passed. Then weeks. And each time, the stranger returned. Sometimes he'd stand at the edge of the cotton fields, motionless, facing the house. Other times, beneath the willow tree by the creek, or near the old family cemetery where the Bogards had been buried for generations. Always at a distance. Always silent. Sarah, the head maid, began to keep watch too. But no matter how quickly she turned, she never caught him leaving. One moment he was there, next, gone. Elalina started keeping notes in a small leather diary. She marked every sighting, the date, the weather, where he stood, and how long he stayed. The entries began calmly enough, clinical, even, but by the seventh sighting, her handwriting had changed. Jagged. Uneven. He waits at dusk now. He knows I see him. And tonight, I think he smiled. Rumors spread quietly through the plantation. Some said it was a runaway. Others, a northern abolitionist come to stir trouble. But the field hands, those who knew the land better than anyone, spoke of older things. Things that moved in the mist before men built fences. By midsummer, Elalina stopped attending church. She avoided mirrors, spoke less at dinner, and once, Thomas found her standing barefoot in the yard long after midnight, her nightgown soaked with dew. When he tried to lead her inside, she whispered something that chilled him. "He's close tonight. Can't you feel it?" Thomas didn't answer. For the first time, he had felt something, an unease that settled in the bones, a silence that didn't belong to night. He tried to laugh it off again, but the sound caught in his throat. That night, he dreamt of the east field, moonlight glinting off rows of cotton like silver waves, and in the center of it all, a pair of eyes looking straight through him. When he woke, his pillow was damp with sweat, and from somewhere beyond the window, he swore he heard movement. Just the wind, he told himself. But the wind doesn't breathe. Summer came heavy that year. The air clung to skin like wet linen, and even the cicadas seemed too weary to sing. On Willow Creek, life slowed to a hush, the kind of quiet that feels like waiting. Elalina Bogart hadn't left her room in days. The curtains stayed drawn, the mirrors covered, and the house servants spoke in whispers as they passed her door. Sarah, ever loyal, was the only one allowed inside. That was how she found out. When she helped her mistress dress one morning, she noticed the change, the faint curve of a belly beneath the silk gown, the glow that wasn't from candlelight. Sarah's hands froze midair. "Miss Eleanor," she began softly, but her mistress only smiled, a small, trembling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's happened again." Sarah knew what that meant. A pregnancy. The fourth. But instead of joy, there was dread. The last one had nearly taken Elalina's life. The doctor had warned them both, another attempt could be fatal. And yet here she was, radiant and frightened all at once, as if something inside her was both a gift and a curse. For weeks, she kept it a secret from her husband. She told no one but Sarah. Her journal entries from that time, later found in a faded trunk, hinted at her growing unease. There is movement too early. It feels aware. It listens when I speak. She wrote of dreams where she stood waist-deep in dark water, the reflection of the moon shattering into 1,000 golden eyes that blinked up at her. When Thomas finally discovered the truth, it was already impossible to hide. He was overjoyed, at first. For years he had longed for a child, an heir to carry his name. But that night, as they sat by the fire, he noticed how she held her stomach. Not with tenderness, but with caution. "You're afraid," he said softly. "Not of the child," she replied. "Of what it brings." Thomas laughed it off. He had to. The alternative, that something unnatural could be growing within his wife, was too monstrous to entertain. Yet as the months passed, unease crept into every corner of the house. Elalina's appetite changed. She craved things she had never eaten: salt, ice, raw meat. She spoke to herself when she thought no one was listening, murmuring lullabies in a language Sarah didn't recognize. Once, Sarah caught her standing before the nursery mirror, whispering, "It's not me that's growing the child. It's the child that's growing me." The words made no sense, yet felt terribly true. Thomas tried to stay occupied, expanding the fields, managing accounts, avoiding the room where his wife spent her days. But he couldn't escape the feeling that the house itself had turned watchful. Doors creaked without cause. The air seemed to hum at night, like the low rhythm of the sea. And then came the first sign that something wasn't right. Elalina began locking her door at night. When Thomas knocked, she wouldn't answer. Once, in anger, he forced the door open, only to find her standing at the window, whispering softly to the moon. "He's listening," she said. "Who?" Thomas demanded. She turned slowly, her expression serene. The one from the field. By August, she looked 9 months pregnant, though by all accounts, she should have been in her second trimester. The doctor called it an anomaly of gestation. Evelina called it destiny. Whatever was growing inside her wasn't just a child. It was a secret, one that no human heart was meant to hold. The storm began at dusk. Thunder rolled across Calhoun County like the growl of something ancient waking from sleep. The oaks around Willow Creek bent under violent winds, their roots groaning in the soaked earth. Lightning flashed, turning the cotton fields into a sea of white fire. Inside the great house, Evelina Bogard screamed. Sarah and 2 other servants rushed to her room, finding her doubled over, soaked in sweat, the bedsheets tangled around her trembling body. The child was coming, 2 months early. Thomas, half drunk in his study, stumbled to the doorway, his face as pale as the marble floors. Dr. Williams couldn't be fetched, the roads were flooded. It would have to be Sarah. She had helped deliver dozens of children on the plantation, but never like this. The air itself felt charged, as if the storm outside had found its twin inside that room. Between contractions, Evelina whispered the same words again and again. "He's here. He's watching." Sarah tried to calm her, but when she turned toward the window, her breath caught. Through the sheets of rain, a figure stood in the field. Tall, still, facing the house. The thunder cracked overhead as Evelina's body went still. Her eyes opened wide, and for one horrifying moment, she stopped breathing, just stared past Sarah toward the window. "He's waiting," she said. "It's time." Then, with a single cry, the child was born. The silence that followed was unbearable. No one moved. No one spoke. Until the infant let out a sound. Soft, too soft. Not a wail, but a sigh. Sarah took the child gently, expecting tears, motion, anything. But when she looked down, her hands began to shake. The baby's eyes were open. Not brown like Thomas's, nor blue like Evelina's. They were a deep, liquid amber, glowing faintly even in the candlelight. And the pupils, they weren't round. They were thin, vertical slits, like those of a cat, or something that didn't belong to land at all. Thomas stepped forward, his face drained of color. What is that?" Evelina, her voice barely a whisper, replied. "Our son." But even she couldn't stop staring. By morning, the storm had passed. The fields shimmered with dew, and the air smelled clean again. Yet nothing inside the house felt clean. Dr. Williams arrived, exhausted and soaked to the bone. He examined the baby, taking notes with trembling hands. His official statement later would call it a rare ocular anomaly, but privately, he admitted to Sarah that he'd never seen anything like it. When he handed the child back, Thomas refused to hold him. Instead, he turned to his wife, voice cracking under disbelief. "Whose child is this, Evelina?" She smiled faintly, stroking the baby's cheek. "You already know," she said. "He's been watching us for months." 3 days later, Thomas called his lawyer. He changed his will, cutting the infant out entirely. He stopped sleeping in their bedroom. He stopped looking at the child. And before long, he stopped laughing altogether. But even as he tried to pretend the baby wasn't his, the servants whispered that the infant seemed to know things, tracking people with those golden eyes, silent but aware. Sometimes, at night, Sarah swore she heard cooing sounds that weren't coming from the crib, but from the window. And once, just once, she saw the baby smile. Not up at her. Out, toward the fields. Something changed inside Willow Creek after the birth. Not just in the people, but in the house itself. The air grew heavy, the corridors colder. Lamps flickered even when the glass was new, and mirrors fogged over without cause. Sarah, who'd worked there her whole life, said the place had begun to breathe, slowly, quietly, like it was alive. At the center of it all was the nursery. Evelina rarely left it now. She kept the baby, James, she called him, by her side at all hours, refusing help from the wet nurse or the servants. She spoke to him constantly, in low, murmured tones no one else could understand. Sometimes, when Sarah passed by, she could hear both voices. One soft and human. The other, a whisper that didn't sound like speech at all. The baby never cried. Even when hungry, even when left alone. His golden eyes followed movement with eerie precision, as if he already understood the world around him. Dr. Williams returned weekly, convinced his observations would explain everything scientifically. But every visit left him more unsettled. In his notes, found decades later, he wrote, "Child displays remarkable alertness. Reflexes advanced beyond developmental expectations. Suggest heightened sensory response, or, less comfortably, awareness." That word, awareness, troubled him most. Thomas, meanwhile, avoided the nursery entirely. When he did see his son, it was from a distance, and never for long. He'd stand in the doorway, stiff and silent, while Evelina rocked the child by the window, humming a melody that didn't belong to any hymn or lullaby. One night, after too much bourbon and too little sleep, Thomas finally broke. He stormed into the nursery, demanding answers. "What is he?" he shouted. "He's ours," she replied calmly. "No. Mine, Evelina. Is he mine?" She didn't answer. She only looked down at the baby, whose small hand reached up toward her face, and then toward him, slowly, deliberately, until Thomas backed away as if struck. He slammed the door behind him and never entered that room again. The servants whispered that Mr. Bogard had gone mad. But those closer to the house knew better. It wasn't madness. It was fear. Strange things began happening after that night. Objects moved in empty rooms. Footsteps echoed in hallways long after everyone had gone to bed. One morning, Sarah found muddy footprints on the nursery floor, tiny, bare, and wet, as if someone had walked straight in from the fields. Except it had rained all night, and no one had been outside. Evelina stopped sleeping altogether. When Sarah begged her to rest, she said something that chilled her to the core. "He doesn't sleep. He only dreams when they dream." "Who are they?" Sarah asked. Evelina smiled faintly. "You've seen them. In the mist." By autumn, the house had fallen silent. The laughter, the piano, the dinner conversations, all gone. Only the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair remained, echoing softly through the halls at night. Thomas wrote letters to doctors in Augusta and Charleston, inquiring about asylums. He told no one what truly haunted him, that sometimes, in the mirror, he saw the baby's reflection staring back when the child wasn't there. In his journal, his final entry from that month read, "There is something in this house that watches me through his eyes, and it knows I see it." Soon, Thomas would no longer be the one doing the watching, because Willow Creek was waking up, and it wanted more than just to be seen. By early winter, the house was nearly silent. No laughter, no piano, no echoes of conversation, only the whisper of wind moving through the oak trees outside. But inside the nursery, there were still voices. Sarah would hear them at night while tending the fires. One voice was unmistakably Evelina's, soft, low, almost reverent. The other, she could never quite describe. It wasn't a child's voice, nor a man's, but something in between. Rhythmic, hollow, like the murmur of waves pulling at the shore. At first, Sarah told herself it was just the wind in the chimney, until the night she heard her own name spoken back to her, from the nursery, in that same watery cadence. She never went near the door again after that. Thomas, meanwhile, had grown gaunt. His once commanding posture was replaced by the restless energy of a man haunted. He no longer met visitors, no longer rode out to the fields. He'd sit in his study for hours, staring at the ledgers he no longer cared to balance. His journal from that period, discovered in the 1960s, reads like the unraveling of a mind. She speaks to him in whispers I cannot bear to hear. Sometimes I catch words I almost recognize, names that do not belong to men. When she looks at me now, I feel as if the house itself is looking through her. He watches me when I walk past the door. He doesn't blink. I thought infants were helpless, but this one, he waits. One night, Thomas forced himself to the nursery door and pressed his ear against it. He could hear her voice inside, speaking in that strange, rolling language. But beneath it came another sound, deep, resonant, like something vast moving through water. He fled before he could hear more. That same week, Dr. Williams made his final documented visit to the plantation. He found Elalina pale but calm, the baby thriving. He noted nothing unusual in the physical sense, only that she spoke of those who live below, and of the child's true kin who will come when the tide is right. He prescribed rest and left before sunset, later confessing he had never felt so eager to leave a patient's home. In a letter to a colleague, the doctor wrote, "There is an atmosphere in that place, an almost palpable pressure. It's as if the air itself resists intrusion. The infant's eyes reflect light strangely, even in shadow. I would swear the pupils constrict when he is spoken to, as if understanding." Elalina's journal from this period was later recovered, water-stained and warped, but still legible in parts. One entry stood out. "He spoke today. Not babble, not mimicry, words. Or something that was words once. I understood them, though I could never repeat them. They tasted like salt and thunder. I know now what he is. And I know who waits for him." She described dreams of the sea, of vast shapes moving beneath black water, of a voice calling her name from below. Each morning she woke with damp hair and the smell of brine on her pillow. The decision came suddenly. One frosted December morning, Thomas announced that Elalina and the child would be sent to the family's coastal property near Brunswick. He claimed the sea air would do her good. But to those who knew him, it was clear. He was sending his wife away, not to heal her, but to escape her. By then, Thomas had stopped calling the boy his son. In private letters later found in his brother's estate, he wrote, "There is something in the child that knows me, yet does not see me as father. He studies me like a memory of another kind. And when I dream, I see eyes beneath the waves, watching, waiting." Elalina said nothing as preparations were made. She seemed almost serene, calm in a way that unnerved the servants. When Sarah helped her pack, she noticed the mistress had left behind nearly all her clothes, taking only her journal and the baby's cradle. "You'll need warm things by the coast," Sarah urged. "No," Elalina replied softly. "The sea is never cold where we're going." Those words lingered with Sarah long after the carriage rolled away. The Brunswick house was smaller, lonelier, a white manor perched on the edge of the marshlands, where the ocean's breath could be felt in every gust of wind. Sarah and 2 other servants accompanied her. Thomas remained at Willow Creek, claiming business obligations. For the first few days, everything seemed normal enough. Elalina walked the shore each evening, carrying the child wrapped in a white blanket. The locals said she could be seen standing at the water's edge long after sunset, her gown rippling like sea foam. Then, one night, a fisherman swore he saw figures moving in the waves. Not boats. Not swimmers. Figures, tall, luminous, wading toward the shore before sinking again into the deep. When he told the servants at the Brunswick house, they begged Elalina not to walk alone. She smiled and said only, "Their family." On the 10th night, a storm rolled in from the Atlantic. The wind howled through the marsh, and lightning turned the ocean white. Sarah was the first to smell the smoke. By the time she reached the staircase, flames were already crawling up the walls. She screamed for Elalina, but the nursery door wouldn't open. The heat forced her back. Outside, the servants tried to form a bucket line, but the storm made it useless. The house burned like a beacon against the dark sea. By dawn, it was gone. 2 bodies were found in the ashes, Sarah's companion and another maid. Both burned beyond recognition, identified only by fragments of jewelry. Elalina and the baby were nowhere to be found. Hours later, a young woman named Mary was discovered wandering the shoreline miles away, her clothes drenched in seawater, her eyes wide and glassy. When the sheriff questioned her, she spoke in a trembling voice. They came for him, just like she said they would. Men, if they were men at all, walking out of the sea. Their eyes, they shone like the baby's. Miss Elalina was waiting. She handed him to the tallest one, and they spoke in sounds I couldn't understand. Then she looked back at me and said, "Tell Thomas he was right not to trust his eyes, but wrong not to trust mine." Mary fainted before she could say more. The official record called it a tragedy, postpartum madness, a fire, a drowning. But those who knew the sea near Brunswick claimed that on calm nights you could still see a faint light beneath the water, far from shore. like someone holding a lantern deep below the waves. More than a century passed before anyone dared reopen the story of Willow Creek. The Bogard name had long faded from polite conversation, buried under generations of Southern history, forgotten like so many ghosts left to rot in the soil. But history has a way of whispering to those who listen closely. In 1961, a research team from Atlanta University began a project to document the lives of enslaved people in Georgia's antebellum plantations. Among their leads was a box of dusty papers labeled Bogard Estate, Calhoun County. Inside were fragments, ledgers, birth records, medical bills, and 2 journals. One belonged to Thomas Bogard. The other, smaller and bound in cracked leather, was Elalina's. That discovery should have been routine. But as Dr. Marcus Wilson, the team's lead historian, would later write, some histories resist being uncovered. The Bogard papers felt less like records, and more like warnings. Thomas's journal told the story of a man unraveling, his wife's descent, his fear of their child, and his plan to send them away. His last entry before the Brunswick fire read, "I can no longer bear her eyes upon me." Or his, "The house feels hollowed by something that does not sleep. If there is mercy in this world, let the sea take them both." But it was Elalina's diary that chilled the researchers. Though water-damaged, many passages survived. One in particular stood out. "He spoke his true name tonight. Not James, not a human word at all. It was older. The sound itself bent the air. I felt the tide pull within my veins. They are calling, and soon the sea will answer." Another entry, dated the night before the fire. "Thomas thinks he has hidden us away. Foolish man. This house was never meant to keep us apart. It was meant to bring us home. When the tide turns, I will walk to the shore. My son will go before me, and I will follow. The water remembers its own." Dr. Wilson's assistant reportedly left the project after transcribing those lines. She told colleagues that for weeks after, she dreamt of standing on a black shoreline, watching shapes rise from the waves. The team pressed on. They found letters between Dr. Williams, the family physician, and the county magistrate, written weeks after the fire. One letter, sealed and never sent, read, "I withheld details from the record. The child bore traits that no human medicine can explain: luminescent skin, slight webbing between the fingers, and gill-like ridges that opened and closed when he breathed. I beg you, do not let the sea claim him again." The letter had been hidden inside a courthouse cornerstone, perfectly preserved. It was enough to push the research beyond folklore into something far stranger. By autumn, Dr. Wilson's team had traced every remaining descendant of the Bogard line. Most had died young or childless. But one elderly relative in Baltimore, Thomas's great-nephew, shared a curious family saying passed down through generations. "We don't look east on September nights. The eyes from the deep don't like to be seen." The discovery made headlines briefly, then vanished from public record, suppressed, perhaps, or ignored as superstition. But one note in Dr. Wilson's field diary remained deeply unsettling. After visiting the ruins of Willow Creek, he wrote, "The wall along the eastern boundary still stands. Old stone, slick with moss. But something about it feels wrong. It's as if the wall isn't meant to keep anything out, but to keep something in." And beneath that final line, he added, almost as an afterthought, "At midnight, I saw movement in the fields. It was watching me." Time has a strange way of protecting secrets. For decades after Dr. Wilson's discovery, the Bogard case slipped back into obscurity. Mentioned only in whispers, dismissed as folklore by academics who preferred their ghosts safely buried in books. But some secrets refused to stay buried. By the late 20th century, the world had changed. Technology could reach places where superstition once ruled. And when researchers turned their instruments toward the old lands and waters of Georgia's coast, they found echoes. In 1972, a team of marine archaeologists mapping the seafloor off Brunswick discovered something that defied geology: a perfect circular depression nearly 50 feet wide, plunging straight down into darkness. Sonar readings revealed no bottom, no natural formation that could explain it. When 2 divers attempted to approach the site, both surfaced early, shaking, pale, unable to describe what they'd seen. One simply muttered, "Eyes." The other refused to speak at all. The formation was quietly labeled Natural Seafloor Anomaly on official charts. But among the team, it had another name. They called it the Mouth. Meanwhile, inland, the wall that Thomas Bogard had ordered built along the eastern boundary of Willow Creek was still standing, over a century after his death. 6 feet high, 2 feet thick, and covered in creeping ivy. But county maintenance records revealed a disturbing pattern. Every year, near the September full moon, the same section of that wall was found cracked, sometimes crumbled entirely. And every year, it was repaired, funded mysteriously by a Baltimore trust tied to the long-dead Bogard estate. When Dr. Wilson's team investigated in 1961, they documented 27 such incidents. The pattern continued well into the 1980s. Locals joked that kids were vandalizing it. But those who lived nearest to the property spoke differently. They said that on those nights, the air around the wall shimmered with mist, even when the skies were clear. That if you stood too close, you'd hear waves, though the nearest ocean was 100 miles away. And sometimes, if you stayed long enough, you'd hear breathing. In 2004, a marine biologist named Tara Williams published a study on genetic mutations in fish species along the Georgia coast. Buried deep in her data was an anomaly, a recurring genetic marker in specimens caught near Brunswick and Sapelo Island, linked to vertical pupils and reflective eye structures unlike any other vertebrate in the region. She described it as an unexplained adaptation, possibly ancient, possibly introduced. Dr. Williams never knew of the Bogard case. But her mentor, Robert Chen, did. In his private notes, he wrote, "The data points align too closely with local legends. Could be coincidence. But if it isn't, then something once entered this ecosystem, and it never left." By the early 2000s, Willow Creek's land had changed hands many times. The old plantation was now a commercial pine forest, the house long demolished. Only the family cemetery and remnants of the wall remained. Then, in September 2019, a Category 3 hurricane struck Georgia's coast. Meteorologists called its inland path unprecedented. After weakening near Brunswick, it veered inland and hit Calhoun County directly. When the storm cleared, the trees were flattened, the ground torn apart, and the wall gone. Not toppled. Not eroded. Gone, as if pulverized from within. Local volunteers who scoured the property afterward found hundreds of small black stone carvings scattered in the mud, each depicting elongated figures with large eyes, and in several, a taller figure holding a child. The county museum keeps one on display today. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "The Bogard Mystery, the wall fell, but the sea remembers." There are stories that fade with time. And then there are those that linger, like salt on skin, like a voice you can still hear long after it stops speaking. The Bogard case was one of those stories. After the 2019 storm destroyed what remained of Willow Creek's wall, researchers, locals, and paranormal enthusiasts flooded Calhoun County. Everyone wanted an explanation, geological, historical, supernatural. What they found instead were questions. Satellite scans showed a disturbance beneath the property, a faint sinkhole aligned perfectly with the east field where Ella Lenina had first seen the stranger 167 years before. Ground-penetrating radar revealed something impossible, an underground void that extended horizontally toward the east, as though the land itself had been hollowed out, reaching back toward the sea. And within that void, faint traces of movement, like the pulse of something alive. Soon after, eyewitness reports began. Locals claimed to see figures among the trees at night, tall, thin silhouettes standing motionless in the mist. Drivers on the back road that once bordered the plantation swore they saw reflections of glowing eyes between the pines. And once a year, in September, those who lived nearby began waking from the same dream. Standing on a black shore, watching the sea glow, hearing a woman's voice whisper, "The water remembers its own." When one of the surviving researchers from Dr. Wilson's 1961 team was interviewed before his death, he said something that sent chills through everyone in the room. "She was right, you know, Eleanor Bogard. Thomas was wrong not to trust her eyes. Because she didn't see madness. She saw memory. A memory older than humanity itself." In 2020, a DNA re-examination of samples from Thomas Bogard's family line revealed another anomaly. a rare sequence resembling those same marine mutations Dr. Williams had discovered in coastal species decades earlier. The results were ruled contaminated, sealed by the testing lab. But a technician later admitted that one of the samples glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Even now, some of the Bogard descendants joke that they never get seasick. Others refuse to go near the ocean at all. There's a story, quietly told among those who still live near Calhoun County, about a fisherman out of Brunswick who once found something strange in his nets. Not a fish. Not a corpse. Something in between. The body was small, infant-sized, pale, smooth, but its eyes were open, gold as dawn, unblinking beneath the water. He never fished that stretch again. When the sheriff asked where he'd found it, the fisherman pointed toward the horizon and said only, "Where the lights dance beneath the tide." That phrase matches a note written by the lighthouse keeper on Sapelo Island in 1853, the night after the Brunswick fire. 3 lights above the sea. They sank before dawn. May they never rise again. What, then, truly happened to Elenina and her child? Was it madness, myth, or something the world simply isn't ready to explain? Some historians call it a Gothic tragedy. Some scientists call it a coincidence. But for those who have stood at the ruins of Willow Creek on a September night beneath the full moon, the answer feels much simpler and far more terrifying. Because when the wind moves through the pine forest, it carries the sound of the ocean. And if you listen closely, beneath the rustling leaves, you'll hear it, a faint lullaby rising from the earth itself. A song for a child with another man's eyes. Thomas was right not to trust his eyes, but wrong not to trust hers. The story of Willow Creek ends where it began, at the edge of a field, beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds, where a woman once saw a stranger standing still among the cotton. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the sea still waits.